Hey everyone, welcome back to Coach All Writes. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some AP Lang exam tips to help you feel prepared for the upcoming exam. Let's start by talking about the multiple choice section. So for the multiple choice section, you're going to have 1 hour to answer 45 questions. The first two passages on the exam are going to be reading questions. These are basically comprehension questions, and the passages are on the longer side compared to the writing questions that come later, and there are typically more questions for these passages. The two passages together amount for approximately half of the multiple choice questions. So here are some general tips that you can use. First of all, you're going to want to use process of elimination because there are going to be 5 answer choices and not 4. This usually means that at least 2 answers can be easily tossed out because they are not relevant to the question or they're just a misread of the passage. If you can narrow it down to 2 or 3 answer choices, then you're in good shape. As you're looking at these answer choices, think about which one best answers the question. Sometimes this might mean that you have to reread a certain portion of the passage. If you're asked about a certain line number, you might want to read the surrounding lines as well. Answer choices that are too vague or are about a different section of the passage are distracting answers. So keep that in mind as you're answering these questions on the exam. If you're running out of time on the exam, prioritize the questions that are about a small portion of the passage as opposed to the passage as a whole. These questions might be questions about certain words in context, or they could be questions about a specific paragraph, like the first paragraph, or maybe the relationship between the first 2 paragraphs. These questions can usually be answered relatively quickly and accurately without having to read the whole passage. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not telling you to read the whole passage, but if you are pressed for time, keep in mind that each question is essentially worth 1 point, because there are 45 questions, and this amounts to 45% of your composite score. So in that sense, it is a number game. You want to answer as many questions correctly as possible. And so for that reason, if time is running out, then prioritize the questions that you know you can answer quickly. Also, it's really important that you answer all questions, even if it's just a guess. You're not penalized for wrong answers, so make sure that you bubble in an answer for all 45 questions. Now let's talk about the writing multiple choice. Many of my students actually prefer this type of question. These are the questions that are on the last 3 passages of the multiple choice section. These passages say that they're a draft, and they're typically much shorter and they tend to have fewer questions. This portion of the multiple choice section tends to take a little bit less time as well. However, if this is your strength in the multiple choice section, you don't want to waste too much time on the reading section and then shortchange yourself some time on the writing section. So make sure that you're keeping pace. If you're trying to use the full hour, you might spend approximately 35 minutes on the reading section and about 25 on the writing section. I even have a few students who tend to go to the writing passages first. They answer those questions because that's their strength, and then they go backwards and work on the reading questions. This is totally fine. You can work on whatever questions you want to out of the 45 in whatever order you want to, but be sure that you're bubbling in the correct answer on the answer sheet. The writing multiple choice questions are essentially editing questions. And so you might be asked about how to combine sentences most effectively. To do this, you want to make sure that the answer choice you choose avoids redundancy and is not confusing. There are also some questions about transition words. So you want to select the word that creates the best connection, either within the paragraph or between the paragraphs. There are going to be questions that ask you if the writer should add a particular sentence, or it'll tell you that the writer is thinking of deleting a sentence and you have to decide should they keep it or delete it. For these, you want to ask yourself, does the sentence in question add value? If so, what is that value? If you can answer those questions before looking at the answer choices, usually one answer choice will stand out as being the correct answer. There are also going to be some word choice questions. For these, eliminate anything that sounds cliche or casual. You also want to think about the tone of the passage as well. So for these, you want to choose a precise answer, but you need to make sure that the tone matches the rest of the paragraph. Remember that the tone is the writer's attitude toward the subject. So for example, if the writer has an informative or neutral stance on the topic, you don't necessarily want to choose a word that has a negative connotation toward that topic. Now let's talk about the synthesis essay. This is the first essay that you're going to encounter on the FRQ section of the exam. FRQ stands for free response question, and in total you have 2 hours and 15 minutes for this section. You can answer the essay questions in whichever order you want. You are given a 15-minute recommended reading period, Most students use the bulk of this time for the synthesis essay because you have to read different sources. The good news, though, is that you can start writing during that 15-minute period if you want to. For the synthesis essay, I recommend that you plan a tentative thesis and your main ideas before you start writing. Once you know your main ideas, identify at least one, but ideally two or possibly even three sources to help prove your main idea. For my students, the average is two. I tell them to choose two sources that back up their main idea because that helps them create a conversation of sources. Remember that the sources are supposed to support your claim. That's your evidence. You're not trying to summarize the sources. It's important to create a line of reasoning, and one way to do this is to not only have a strong thesis, but also to use transition words within your paragraph and to use your topic sentences to connect your paragraphs and create a transition that way. I recently posted a video on my channel all about topic sentences, so if you need more information, definitely check out that video. In that video, I give you some sentence frames and examples for each of the FRQs. Now, as far as commentary goes, commentary is probably the most important part of each of the essays because that is how you can improve your score. You get up to 4 points for evidence and commentary. We really want to be shooting for at least a 3 out of 4. To do this, we want to make sure that we have plenty of commentary, and we want to try to keep our commentary even, meaning that we want to make sure that each claim is supported by evidence and commentary. So how do you actually build commentary? Well, I do have a couple other videos about this on my channel, but since you're here, let me give you a couple quick tips. First of all, you can use the word because. Remember that commentary is your own interpretation or analysis. It's the why. And so if you use the word because, you're going to be answering the question why or so what. You can also use verbs like highlights, illustrates, conveys, demonstrates, and suggests. All of these can be used instead of the verb shows. And if you think about what your example is illustrating, then you're adding some commentary. Some general questions to ask yourself as you're coming up with your commentary might be who is helped or harmed by this topic or this solution. You also might think about how this particular topic or solution affects society, both now and in the future. You also want to ask yourself, why does this issue matter? It might not be an issue that you've thought about before the exam, but you still want to think about the differing perspectives and why the issue is important. These questions are pretty versatile, so they can be applied to different prompts, but answering these questions is a way to build your commentary. Now let's talk about my favorite of the 3 essays, rhetorical analysis. I have an entire playlist of rhetorical analysis videos on my channel, so if you're looking for extra help, then please check out that playlist. I have plenty of tips for you. But here are the ones that I think you most need to know for the exam. On the exam, your prompt is going to ask you about rhetorical choices and how it helps the writer with their message, argument, or purpose. So not only do you need to know what a rhetorical choice is, but you also need to be very specific about what the message, argument, or purpose is. Now, in the prompt, they might provide you some of this information. They might tell you something like her message of perseverance. And it is okay to use that word in your thesis, but it's also okay to expand upon that and dig deeper. I always tell my students that if they give you the message, purpose, or argument, you want to try to use a synonym or dig deeper than what they give you. They're giving you the surface, and you need to show that you truly understood the passage. So make sure that what you're writing about, not only in your thesis, but also in your body paragraphs, is addressing what you're actually being asked about: message, argument, or purpose. So if you're asked about the message, it is okay to talk about the purpose, but make sure you're actually telling them what the specific message is in your essay. You also want to try to analyze the passage chronologically. Instead of looking for a particular choice like repetition throughout the entire passage, break the passage up into either 2 or 3 parts. If it's 2 parts, think of it like the first half and second half. If it's 3 parts, think of it like the beginning, middle, and end. Now, these parts don't all need to be the same length, but you're looking for shifts in topic, choice, or tone. You're going to divide up the passage after you've read it. Each of these sections can correlate with one paragraph, but you also can combine a couple sections into one paragraph if you need to. Ask yourself, what is the major choice that's happening in this particular section? What is the writer doing in the beginning, middle, and end? Now, it's possible that a couple choices might be working together in that section, and that's okay. Once you figure out what the writer is doing in those sections, that helps you come up with your topic sentence and your evidence and commentary. Now, you want to be sure in your commentary to connect the rhetorical choice to the rhetorical situation. The rhetorical situation involves the speaker, audience, context, exigence, purpose, and message or argument. So you want to make sure that you're analyzing the relationship between the speaker and audience, or perhaps looking at the historical context. Basically, answer this question: why is the writer making this choice for this audience on this occasion? You want to show the person reading your essay that you not only understand what choices they're making, but why the writer is making those choices. Now, a conclusion is not mandatory for any of the essays, but if you are writing a conclusion, one thing you might try to do is situate the issue in a broader context. So you might ask yourself, is the passage historically significant? If so, why? Or you might ask yourself, is the message or argument relevant today? This can be great insight to bring up in your conclusion. Now, if you have great insight into this, but you don't have time for a conclusion, you can actually use this as commentary to kind of finish out your essay in your last body paragraph. Personally, I think the argument essay is the hardest because you have to come up with your own evidence, and sometimes under pressure, that can be really tricky. It's okay to put your reasons in your thesis, but you don't want to give away your exact evidence in your thesis. It is important, though, that in your body paragraphs, you have specific evidence. You don't want to use vague or generalized examples. Most of my students like to pair their evidence together. So they figure out whatever their claim is for that paragraph, and then they figure out which two examples best prove that claim. So they'll have a topic sentence, they'll have their evidence, which is their first example, commentary, and then they'll transition into their second example, followed by more commentary, and a concluding sentence that ties back to their thesis. Now, this is just one way to develop your paragraphs. However, you can have a paragraph that has one major example. You don't always need to pair your evidence. It's also important to realize that your example could be personal experience. Some of the prompts really do lend themselves to you writing about yourself. But if you're going to do this, just make sure that what you're writing about is meaningful and that it clearly proves your thesis. Usually when you write about personal experience, you want to focus on not only meaningful events, but personal growth, an event or experience that genuinely impacted your life, not something trivial. And in case you're wondering, no, the readers don't fact check you, but if you overly exaggerate, you do tend to lose a little bit of credibility with your reader if they're not sure if it's a real example. As far as your commentary goes, be sure to explain the significance of the example. What does that example reveal or highlight about the topic that you're writing about? What's the message or takeaway from that example? Think about what that example proves and why you included it, and be sure to analyze that as you're writing your commentary. Here are some general tips for you. First of all, you should create a game plan. I have a video about this on my channel. Basically, you want to play to your strengths, especially for the essays. I usually tell my students to start with the essay that they feel strongest about, because usually my students need about 40 minutes, if not 45, for those essays. And if so, they can get a higher score. So because of this, I want them to prioritize that essay. Usually it's synthesis and rhetorical analysis. I tell them to leave their worst essay for last, mostly because in my experience looking at their work, and I know this advice might not apply to everybody, but I've noticed that they can write an essay in 30 minutes and 40 minutes, and that essay will probably get the same score, especially if they find the prompt really challenging. And so because of that, I want them to spend their time on the essays that they feel confident in. Now, that being said, I want my students to answer all essays, at least make an attempt at it. That means that in a worst case scenario, let's say you totally mismanage your time and you've got 20 minutes left. For that essay, write a thesis statement and at least one body paragraph. Do the very best you can, because you can score 3 out of 6 points with just that. In fact, if that body paragraph is amazing, you might even be able to squeak by with a 4 out of 6. Who knows? But give yourself the opportunity to score those points. The thesis point is relatively easy to earn. Last year in 2021, approximately 97% of students earned it for question 3, the argument essay, and I believe about 98% of students earned it for the synthesis essay. For rhetorical analysis, it was 90% of students. This should tell you that it is a relatively easy point to earn, but we want to make sure that we have that thesis statement there. You also want to try to have a body paragraph, because if you can include evidence and commentary, you're eligible for more points. So be sure to set aside some time before the exam to make your game plan, but remember that sometimes game plans do change. So think of your best case scenario and be able to play to your strengths. You also want to make sure that you're using topic and concluding sentences to establish and reinforce your claim for the paragraph. This will help you create a line of reasoning. It also helps you and your reader know what you're trying to prove in that paragraph to help you make sure you're staying on topic. Really focus on your evidence and commentary because that's up to 4 points out of a total of 6 points. So it amounts to 2/3 of your score. Remember that your essay is a rough draft. Your reader doesn't expect you to be perfect. It's okay to have spelling mistakes or even grammatical errors. Just make sure that you're getting words on the page. I know writer's block is real, and I know that you can be anxious, but you have to at least put something down. Also remember, for synthesis and argument, you don't technically need to address the counter argument. Yes, it is a way to earn the sophistication point, but that is incredibly rare. So only do so if you feel that it will help your essay. I tell my students that I would much rather have them write 2 strong body paragraphs that prove their thesis than to waste time on a counter argument that might fall flat. If my students do address the counter argument, it's usually in their 3rd body paragraph, and that's because if they don't get to that point in their essay, they still have 2 strong body paragraphs to help them earn some points. I'm also asked all the time, do I need a conclusion for my essay? And the answer is no, it's not on the rubric. That being said, a conclusion can be very helpful, especially if you're able to situate the issue in a broader context. It could be a nice way to round out your essay. Some students even use it to restate their thesis in case it wasn't defensible the first time. That being said, if you can only manage an intro and a couple body paragraphs and no conclusion, that's all right. If you're running out of time, skip the conclusion. Another time-saving tip is to not write a super long intro. 1 to 3 sentences is totally fine. Just make sure you have a thesis. My final tip for you is to answer the prompt. It can really help if you turn the prompt into a question instead of a statement. Also, it helps to underline or circle the task that you're being asked to write about. That way you can refer back to it. But make sure that your thesis addresses the prompt, and so does the rest of your essay. You don't want to go off on a tangent, and you don't want to change the prompt into something that it's not. It's also important to stick to the task. Make sure that you know what you're being scored on for each of the 3 essay types. So for instance, for synthesis, make sure you have at least 3 sources. For rhetorical analysis, make sure you're analyzing the rhetorical choices and the message, argument, or purpose. And for argument, make sure you have specific evidence and commentary. Knowing what readers look for helps you make sure that you're staying on task, and that can help your score as well. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube, and make sure that you go follow Coach Hall Writes on TikTok as well. Before you go, be sure to check out the description box below. I have several resources there that might help you as you prepare for the AP Lang exam. And until next time, happy writing!